Welcome to Spare Room Studio, a place to create and relax. Hi everyone, welcome back into the Spare Room Studio. Today I am going to colour in the Forest Girls colouring book by Aeppol or Aeppol, not sure how the best pronunciation of that name is. And I have the English version book here that I purchased recently. I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit. I want to try and get as much of the book in here as I can. That's it, without cutting anything off, hopefully. And the print in this book is quite light, as you can see, which I think is going to be really nice to use watercolours with. So I'm going to give it a go. I don't know how the paper is going to react. And I think that's about as dark as I'm going to get in there at the moment. So let's see how this progresses. Now I'm going to use Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils, and I've got some pots of water, and I'm going to use regular brushes and not a water brush. And I have absolutely no idea what the original of this one looks like because I don't have it. So I'm just going to do my own thing, and I'm going to start with the sky. And I'm going to start with, I think I'll use light phthalo blue. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen me work before, but I'm going to assume you don't know what I'm doing, and I'll explain everything as I go as per usual. And I've got no idea how this paper is going to cope with the amounts of water that I like to slop on. As I'm already discovering, it looks like it's going through pretty quickly. So this may be a big flop. We'll see. So I'm going to start with the Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils, and if this doesn't feel like it's very successful, I may bring in some Caran d'Acheneau colour 2s as well. You may hear a slight humming noise in the background, and if you do, I do apologise, but that's my husband. He's using a pressure washer, and he's making the most of a warm day to get it done and dry, because it is currently the 13th of April, I believe, and here in my hometown we've got temperatures in the low 30s Celsius, which is quite unusual for this time of year. We do get the odd warm day around, this time of year. It can be warm up to sort of early April, but this is pretty late to be having these sorts of temperatures. So he's making the most of it and using the pressure washer to do a bit of a tidy up prior to winter coming. We've had a really long, hot, dry, dusty summer. We've had very, very little rain, well, next to no rain. I wouldn't even call it rain. We've had a few showers here and there, but it has been so dry and dusty that everything is needing a refresh. Now this paper seems to be extremely absorbent, so I don't know that I'm going to do too well with my usual method here of working, but we'll see how it pans out. So what I like to do is wet the paper thoroughly, and then I like to apply the paint to the paper, either using the brush by lifting colour from the tip, or as you can see, I like to do a lot of this splattering and let it mix and blend on the page and do its own thing, like a very, very loose sort of abstract look. So I don't know how this is going to dry. I haven't really looked into how other people have used this book, so I am just doing my own thing at this stage. So we might leave that to be quite random. The sky doesn't necessarily have to go through everything, but I will put a little bit more up the top there. Now, I don't like to recommend brushes because I don't really know a lot about brushes myself, even though I have studied watercolour in the past. I've always been on quite a tight budget when it comes to my supplies, so I don't have expensive brushes. And so I always say to people that ask for advice about brushes that it is really best if you can visit a bricks and mortar art store and ask for advice from the people that are working there, because they're usually art students or people who are actually working artists and supplementing their income. So they will be much more knowledgeable than what I can be. But what I'm using here is actually called a round brush, and it's quite large. It's a size 12. This one's a Robert A. Wade Neef, N-E-E-F, 970 Taclon round. So it's synthetic bristles. If you get something with natural bristles, it's going to be a lot more expensive, but if you take care of it, it will last you forever. And to take care of it, you need to make sure that you clean your brushes thoroughly after use, and you do not store them with the brush down. You store them with the bristles down. You store them with the bristles up, or laying in some sort of pouch. If you store them with the bristles up, you need to make sure they're dry, because the water sitting in the brush will damage inside here. So, you know, there will be sites that you can access on the internet that will be able to give you much more information about the care of watercolour brushes than I can give you, but that's just some of the basic stuff to get you started. Okay, so I'm going to let that be quite abstract. I've got a big drop there that I don't really want, so we will blend that out. And same there, that's all a bit too blobby. So I'm not sure how this is going to go for cockling and bending and so on, so we'll see how it progresses. Now this was light phthalo blue, if you're following along, and it is number 145. So I shall leave that to the side in case I need that again. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and while I'm letting that dry, I'm not going to obviously touch this area, because if I go over the line, it's going to bleed into the sky immediately. So while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to get started down in this lower area, and I want a nice colour for the basket here. So I'm actually going to use brown ochre, I think. Now my pencils, they cop a lot of hardware, so I'm just going to show you what I do to some of the pencils to explain. So you may be able to see here that I don't always sharpen the pencils much, and you can see that I'm wearing away the pigment inside the wood casing there. And then this one here is, you can see how out of shape that is, because that's where I'm constantly brushing colour from the tip of the pencil. So I don't often sharpen them, but this one is in a bit of a state, so I'm just going to give this one a sharpen before I use it. And I've got a Prismacolor manual sharpener here to hand, that I'm just going to use that one. And I'm not going to do much of a sharpen, so that's all I'm going to do, because I'm not actually colouring with that point directly onto the paper. It doesn't need to be a big point for me. So now I've got a few different brushes here that are very similar sizes. In fact, they are all the same size. So this one's a company here in Australia called Premier, and that's Taklon too. That's a number 6. This one is a number 6, the Robert A. Wade brand again, Neef 970, and that's a round number 6. So for some reason I've got 2 of those. This one here is a number 5. And this is Taklon. So Taklon is a synthetic, and then this is a really cheap one that I got off of the internet. So I just wanted to show you that I don't particularly use anything special. The reason I like the round brushes is that you can form a point with your round brushes. So if they're a bit on the bigger side, it doesn't really matter, as long as you can form a decent point. See if I can get this to focus. So that's what I mean by forming a point. So you don't want it all frayed and, you know, splayed out everywhere. You want to be able to form a point with it. And I've got a bit of old colour on there by the looks of it. I didn't rinse it out very well after the last time I used it, so that's another reason why you need to clean your brushes better. And it's not going to matter because it's very pale, and I'm going to use brown ochre, which is 182. So I'm going to just, again, I dampened off the paper, not really wet this time. And sometimes what I like to do is dampen that middle area, that middle section of what I'm colouring, and then bring this paint in on the dry bit and encourage it to blend into that damp paper. So you get a nice bit of stronger colour here where the paper is more dry. And then if your paper is good, it will blend into that damp section of it on its own. You don't need to manipulate it or do anything a lot of the time. But this really is not going to be ideal paper for watercolour. I'm just going to see where it was printed, if it is. Doesn't say that it's Amazon printed, but the paper isn't really any better than basic Amazon printed paper, I don't feel. Now, it isn't ideal to keep wetting the tip of the pencil over your page, because if it is very wet and it drips, it's going to it could drip into the wrong area and make a bit of a mess. So I'll try to remember to keep good habits while I'm explaining how to do it, because I'm very lackadaisical and I have had accidents happen because I've forgotten to work away from the page. Now I have the full set of the Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils, so I do have a good range of colour to hand here. And I also have Polychromos, so if I feel like the Albrecht Durers aren't really quite hitting the mark for me, I can use my Polychromos to come in later and do some of the fine details with the Polychromos. So that will do for now. I'll let that dry and see how it dries. And now these boxes could also be wood. I think I might wait until I get some details in here before I decide what colour I want them to be. So I think this little girl, I'm going to do some nice bright colours. So I want to do maybe a pink for her t-shirt. So I'm going to use middle purple pink, 125. And again, I'm just going to dampen down the area that I'm going to colour to Take a little bit from the tip of the pencil and then let it blend in. Now it's not bleeding like I would like it to. This paper is really super absorbent by the looks of it, and it's just sucking the water in immediately. So what I like to do is I like to think about the intensity of colour. So as I'm picking the colour up from the tip, it's obviously going to be quite diluted, quite strong and not diluted too much. But applying it to the damp paper does help to soften and dilute it. So what I do is I try to think about where I want highlights and put the colour on accordingly. In fact, this might actually be working better if I don't wet the paper first. This area here where I've just applied the colour looks quite nice without wetting the paper first. So that might be how I have to work in this book. So I've left a little lighter area there, and then I will also keep picking up the colour from the tip and applying it to the areas that I want to be more prominent and saturated. And then if I feel like that isn't blending very well, I can wash off my brush, get a bit more water on it, and then do that to help blend it in. And you're just barely touching the tip of the pencil sometimes, and just getting the tiniest bit of colour onto that brush. Now, Albrecht Durer are very pigmented compared to most other watercolour pencils. I can't speak about Caran d'Ache or any of those more expensive pencils because I do not own them. And I don't actually want to buy any because I'm quite satisfied with what these Albrecht Durer are doing for me and the other things that I own. So this one is Helio Blue Reddish and it is 151. So I'm just going to pick some colour up from the tip and then apply it to the dry paper down here and see what it ends up looking like. So I want to imply that this might be a little denim pinafore. And when I see that the artist has drawn or indicated seams, I like to try and keep a bit of a highlight where the seams are. I think about my own jeans that I own, and you know how the hem and seams seem to fade quicker than anywhere else. So I try to keep that in mind, and when I'm colouring something that I want to imply is a heavy fabric like a denim, that's what I'm aiming to portray when I'm colouring it. So back to pencil brands, I can't talk about the Caran d'Ache or any of the very expensive watercolour pencils because I don't own any, and at this point in time I'm not planning to buy any either. I'm quite satisfied with what I've got here with the Albrecht Durer. I also have some Derwent watercolour pencils, and then the Inktense. I know that they're not watercolour pencils, but I do use them in conjunction with my watercolour pencils. I interchange those quite often. I've also got some Neo Colour 2s as well now, and I've got traditional watercolours and Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours. So I feel like I've got plenty to choose from when it comes to watercolour mediums, and also I like to use my water-based markers with a lot of water and treat them like a watercolour medium as well. So I feel like I've got more than enough to choose from for a colouring book at this stage, and I don't want to be purchasing any more other than I am going to slowly build up my Neo Colour 2 collection by buying those open stock. So you can see I've got a decent sized brush here, and with that point I've been able to get into that small area near her hand there with the point of this brush. So that's why I like the rounds, as long as they can be can form a small point, then I'm happy to use those. I've got a few little detail brushes as well, but it's amazing what you can teach yourself to do once you practice with a brush as well. To start with, it will feel very uncomfortable and very unwieldy, but you know, it takes practice like everything else. It comes down to practice. So what I'm going to do now is just get a slightly lighter blue. In fact, we might go for that phthalo blue that I used before. And I'm just going to use that to put a bit of lighter blue on these edges for now. And I'll assess later whether I need to be putting more colour on here or pencil or whatever I'm going to do as I go along. So at this point, I'm tending to keep my colours quite light to mid-tone, and I'll worry about doing the darkest darks last with watercolour. So you need to be thinking about preserving some highlights with your watercolour right from the start, because you're working from lightest to darkest, and once you put those darks on, it's very, very difficult to lighten up a watercolour unless you're going to use a white acrylic paint pen or a coloured pencil or something like that. It will be difficult to reinstate a highlight. But you can always go darker. Now I'm just going to come back and do the band around her t-shirt, the neckline, and I'm using that a little bit more saturated. I'm just trying to keep a light touch there and stay in the lines. I have come a little bit out, and then if you've got excess on your brush, just use a bit of paper towel off to the side here and use that to gently dab away any excess colour or water. And you can use an old rag or an old tea towel or whatever you've got around, but I tend to use paper towel a lot for mine. Okay, so I think I might give her some pink socks as well. And I'm going to use the same colour, but I'm going to dilute it a little bit more so it will be much more pale. Now her little dog friend, I don't know anything about the story of this girl, but he or she's got a bandana around the neck, and I think I might do a nice pinkish red. So I'm going to use madder. No, that won't be pinkish enough. Let's go with something. I'll just use the dark red, I think. And that's quite wet, so I'm just taking a bit of water back off with the paper towel there. And that's not all that pink, but a dark red is suitable to go with the colour scheme, so we'll keep that for now. And again, just tiny little bits are being taken off of the tip of the pencil here because it is a small drawing. So when you look at the cost of buying a watercolour pencil, with an expensive watercolour pencil, if you're doing work like this and you're just taking little tiny bits off of the tip at a time, these pencils will last you for, you know, just about forever. They go a very long way. So that dark red is 225. Okay, now with her hair, I think we might go for a sort of light blondish colour. So I'm going to use Burnt Ochre 187, and I'm just going to use that very lightly. And I'll make sure that I leave some highlighted areas for now. Because remember, this is just about getting some colours down for the early stages. We're not going in really dark. And I might actually use that as a base for her little dog here. And I'm also going to use that brown ochre that I had for the basket over here. That's brown ochre, and this colour here is burnt ochre. So use a little bit of the brown ochre as well, so that it ties in. All these things are going to have a relationship to each other. So I do have Hamish in the room with me as well, and he looks like he's going to go off to sleep, but he has a habit of groaning and moaning and making noises when he's asleep. So if you hear any strange noises, it could be coming from him. And I'm going to do the ear more of a brown. So I might use Van Dyke Brown for that, which is 176. And I'm not going to wet the paper first because it's damp around it. And then I'm just going to let that little bit bleed up there. You see how it took off over here where the paper was already damp? But that's okay, because I'm going to keep it darker down to the bottom here. And let it get darker at the top, and do the same colour for his tail. And I might also put a little bit of that on the inside of the basket here. And that just implies that there's a bit of a shadow under there. Okay, so we'll leave those colours out as well. Now, I've got to start thinking about tying in these boxes as well, don't I? So, what will I do there? I think I might do it like it's painted green. At least this one here anyway. I'm going to use a combination of cobalt green, which is 156, and phthalo green 161. So first off with the cobalt green. And what I might do too with it is use the brown ochre, so it can look like it is a wooden box that's been painted, but some of the paint is coming off in areas. That might be how I approach it. So you know how old wooden boxes sometimes get painted, but they might only have one layer of paint on them, and that paint has faded and chipped off, and makes it all look a bit scruffy. So what I'll do is suggest that first, And then I'm going to put this colour over it. And then every now and again, just make sure you clean your brush off in between and get rid of any excess colour or you know, any colour that you've picked up that's not necessarily what you're wanting. I'm not going to cover everything with that cobalt green yet. We'll just see how it dries, and we can always put extra on later. And what I'm trying to keep in mind is that the artist has put lines in to suggest the texture of the wood. So now I'm going to bring in a little bit more of the darker green, the phthalo green. So if you do any sort of strokes or line work, take into account the details that the artist has already put there for you, and do your strokes in the direction of that grain of the wood. And then I'm using a combination of the cobalt green and then the phthalo green, and letting them blend together on the page. If you're doing this, you really are going to have to practice in your book with whatever the paper is like in your book, because this paper is not what I was expecting. It's not behaving how I expected it to behave, so I'm having to adjust and adapt as I go along, and nobody can really prepare me for that because it's not known. If I watch a tutorial, for example, it's not necessarily known to me where the person has sourced that book or where it has been printed, and so there's no guarantee we have the same paper. So if your results look different and you think, well, what am I doing wrong? You may not be doing anything wrong. It may be that the paper is completely different, and you're just going to have to adjust the way you're working, because doing what I'm telling you, you know, isn't working. Then you need to be flexible and then decide to adjust as you go along. So again, I'm going with the line work that the artist has already suggested here to get those lines going. Now the bits where it seems to be where they're joining, I'm actually going to do that in the darker green. That's phthalo green, but I'm also going to use it sparingly and sort of dilute it in some areas and then much stronger in others. So I'm thinking about where there may be any sorts of shadow. If this is in fact two boxes on top of each other here, where this line is, there would be a bit of a deeper colour where the shadow is, where they're overlapping. So this is where when you are colouring, if you can't visualise these things, it's really important that you have a look at reference photos to get some idea. Or if you can visualise, try to think about if this was a real box in front of you, what would be going on with it. You know, dive into your knowledge that you've got of things in your head and think about, well, okay, what do those things actually look like in real life? Okay, so I'm just having a look to try and make sure that the lighting is still okay and how it's looking for you guys. So it's still very washy and light at the moment, and you can see that this is going to dry very, very cockled and uneven. So I may do coloured pencil over the top of it to see if I can help straighten some of that out. So I'm going to keep the brown ochre going. And I'm going to do this box maybe a slightly different colour, just so we get some variety in the picture and it's not all too samey. And this time I think what I might do is, instead of green, I might actually use a red. And I'm going to go with, I think, middle cadmium red for this one, and let's hope this is going to work out, because I haven't really tried anything like this before. I always seem to use green or blue when I'm doing a painted wooden surface, so let's see how red goes. So let's do a little bit of red in there, and I'm letting it be quite diluted and translucent at this stage, until I'm confident that I know what I'm doing. So again, using the brown ochre as the basic sort of natural wood colour, and then introducing that middle cadmium red as the suggestion of a painted surface. And what I'm going to need to do is start putting a few hard edges along to suggest that the paint is actually chipped and, you know, showing the natural wood underneath it. Sort of that, what I'm thinking of is a bit like a shabby chic, but with a very, very washed out old paint colour. So when you're coming up to edges like this, you need to make sure that the blue is completely dry, because if you come up to the edge with a new colour like this and it isn't dry, it's going to bleed right over the line, and that's not necessarily what you're going to want or look good. So there are going to be bits that I imply are still got a lot of paint on them. So now that I'm a little bit more confident that I like this colour, I'll get a little bit more bold with it. So again, always following the lines that the artist has put in there to suggest the texture of the wood. So be as careful as you can when it comes to edges, but don't stress if you go over the lines a little bit. Watercolour is not necessarily meant to be perfect, so you know, you just be a little bit forgiving of yourself and allow some of the happy accidents that can occur. I mean, I obviously don't want all of this red to go directly over her leg, but if a little tiny bit goes over the line, it's not going to be the end of the world. And sometimes when it's a bit too bold, I come back with a clean brush with clean water and just gently blend it out and lift some of that colour off if I need to. Now, if I didn't say at the beginning, I hope that it was quite apparent that it's best to put a couple of layers of paper underneath your page that you're working on. You don't want this to be bleeding onto all your other pages. I'm not sure what they've got going on here because it doesn't read very well. So that's the surface that she's sitting on, and then under here the wood's going in different... Oh, it's a bench. I thought that was the side of it. It looks like it's a bench. Okay, well that makes more sense because that's the side support of the bench, and then this bit here is the horizontal bottom of the bench. That makes more sense. So I will need to think about incorporating a shadow in there maybe to indicate that this here is actually underneath and in shadow. I hadn't clicked that that's what it was. It's actually, she's sitting on a bench and not a box. Oh, I thought it was a box. Okay, that makes more sense. So I will have to bring some shadows in, but we need to let that dry now. And so I'll do a skin tone next, and I think we'll go for a really soft pale pink or something because she looks like she's going to be quite fair if I keep her blonde. Now this is an old set, so I keep forgetting to look up what the equivalent is now. It's called Light Flesh in my set, but I know they changed the names, and its number is 132. So if I remember, I'll try to put the details in the description box, but the number of it is 132. And I'm just going to do a light layer of that all over her skin. So that's getting a bit on the dry side. I needed a little bit more water. Now I'm not going to get all anatomical with this because the style of the drawing doesn't require it to be very highly detailed anatomical depiction of a little girl. So I'm just going to think about where I need the strongest colour, which would be sort of here under her sleeve, and then get lighter as it comes down her arm. Because I think that, as she's got her head up and she kind of is looking in that direction, that's where I'm going to envisage the light hitting her face, that she's got her face to the sun and it's coming in that direction. So under her neck obviously would be a little bit darker because her chin is up. And just a slight difference for her eyelid here because it's the nose, the line of the nose is there, so it sort of depicts that the light would be hitting her nose before it got to her actual face. And then a slight little bit in here to show, where her eyelids would be. And a little bit along the hairline there. And a little bit to maybe depict a nose, but I'm going to leave that really light for now. There's this, I'm guessing this is like a little squirrel or a chipmunk. Squirrel maybe. Now I know that I've done this as a basket, but I'm going to do this handle like it has got a coloured handle that matches down here. So I'm going to do the phthalo green. So that's her washing basket, has actually got coloured handles. And a little bit around the edge of it here. And I'm doing that because there is a lot of that colour in the picture and I'm just trying to break it up a little bit and give a little point of interest. So it's still quite damp up the top there. Now her shoes, I think I'll do like a darker blue. So I'm going to do Indanthrene blue. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. 247. And I'll just put a little bit of water in there. And it's very similar to her dress, but a darker shade. And I think I'll try and keep the sole of her shoe white, a bit like she's got a pair of Vans or something on. Or I can make that darker later. And again, lighter on the top because the sun would be hitting, or the light would be hitting the top of the shoe. And a little bit darker to the edge of the sole that is furthest away from the light source. And I might use that to indicate a little bit of a shadow where her hand is resting on her dress. And a little bit inside the pocket here as well. So you can see that even though that's a decent sized brush, and the point is getting right into these small areas. And I'm thinking that I don't really like that red that I put on there. That was the dark red. So I'm going to use the same colour as her t-shirt, which is the middle purple pink, and I'm just going to brighten it up with that colour so that the dog is matching her. So I've had a small break and come back. The page is still actually quite damp. So down in this section it is still quite damp. But I want you to see a little bit of a close-up before I go to the next stage of deciding what to do with this page. So you can see that the colours are very pale at the moment. And I need to work out how to portray that this is a shelf underneath a bench rather than a box like I thought it was. So there are no details, it's all very loose, and I've got to start thinking about what colours to introduce up here for the rest of the clothes hanging on the clothesline there. So I won't work on here just yet, but we'll get started up here. So I did have a look at the cover, and on the cover that looks like it's a red squirrel to me. So I will go that way as well, I think. So I'm going to look for a sort of deeper orangey colour that I can use for the squirrel. And actually I might get started with burnt sienna, and I think I might need a slightly smaller brush, an in-between size brush. So I've got a couple here that are really cheap ones off of Temu, so might have to start using some of these smaller brushes as well. So okay, so let's get started. Oh, that's quite dark, so let's get a bit of water to try and lighten that off a little bit. So with that I might also use a bit of the burnt ochre that we used earlier. And see, picking up the colour with the smaller brush can be more time consuming. They don't hold so much water, so therefore they're a little bit slower to work with in some ways. But if you are cautious and don't really feel very confident yet, you might feel like you've got a little bit more control with a small brush. But please be aware that it is also quite limiting, because you're not going to get big washy areas with a small brush. This is really for more tight details, so we'll do a few details just for me to demonstrate what I mean. So again, there's not a lot of water here, so it's not so dangerous working over the page, but you really should have a bit of paper towel or a bit of paper or something that can stop you dripping all over the place. So what I'm doing here, it's the same colour that I used on the basket, but it is much more saturated and stronger colour that I'm using. And the little details on this basket, what I'm colouring is the bits that would be in underneath the cross parts of the weave of the basket. So the bits that are at the top need to be lighter to describe that they're catching the light, and the darker bits are the sections that are overlapped. And I'm not going to do all of it. What I try to do with watercolour sometimes is try to get a balance of really very detailed areas in amongst some very washy, so some very tight detailed areas in amongst some washy loose areas, and it's all about doing enough to tell the story of what's going on, and also leaving something to the viewer's imagination for them to fill in the story themselves. So the way that I like to think about it is that we actually don't need an awful lot of information for our brains to then work out what's going on and tell us what we're seeing, because a lot of the time we are not really using our full observation skills. We just look at something and the colours and the light and the dark and the shape and so on tell us that, oh yeah, I'm looking at a wicker basket. So we don't actually need to see every single detail to tell us that it's a wicker basket. We just know that by the shapes and the way that the light and the dark is falling on it, that's a woven wicker basket. And so when I'm colouring an image, or when I used to draw my own images, you need to get a little bit of a balance there between showing some technical brilliance that you know how to portray this thing really cleverly, and also leaving something for the viewer to work out, because if every detail is there on show for you, I don't know if you've ever gone to an art gallery or not, but sometimes when something is really photorealistic and super detailed, and particularly with photographs, I don't often study photographs when I'm at the art gallery. I'll study paintings, but I don't necessarily find myself really drawn to looking at photographs. But when it's something that's photorealistic and everything is there telling you exactly what's going on, I would quite often think, oh yeah, it's a girl sitting on a box. There's some washing blowing, yep, and I walk on by and I don't stop to study it. If there's enough to tell me what it is, but there's a little bit of mystery in, what is the artist trying to tell you about that, or there's something that you need to work out what's going on with it, I'm more likely to stop and have a closer look and work out just what the picture is telling me. I hope that makes sense. Now, there are always going to be people who have strong views when it comes to art, and some people will love, the highly detailed photorealistic stuff. I used to. That used to really drag me in until I started to draw myself and then feel the challenge of trying to portray something and tell a bit of a story about something without relying on photorealism. And you will get people who don't, detest anything that's really detailed, and they're much more interested in abstract, unusual images that really make them think about what they're seeing. And for them, it's not about aesthetics, it's more about working out what is the message behind what they're seeing. So everyone has very firm views about their personal preferences, and that's all okay. Pardon me. What I do like to say you know, when I'm talking to anyone about stuff like this, is that it's really important that we keep an open mind and we allow people to have their own judgments and be polite and respectful that somebody may like something that's really different to what we do. And if you've ever looked at a wicker basket closely, you'd know that it's not an even colour. You know, there are lights and darks and variations in natural organic materials like wicker baskets are made of. So you can use that to your advantage. So when you're drawing or painting something, you don't need to put all the details in. Quite often just using the colour changes will be enough to tell the story of what it is. Pardon me, I've got a very, very croaky voice again today. So that colour that I've just used there, which is Burnt Sienna 283, I'm going to use that to darken this underside of the bench here. Not only will it tone in with what colours I've used here, but again, it keeps that relationship to the wicker basket because I've used the same sort of tones and colours. So I'm just going to darken this now, because if this was a real bench, obviously this under shelf would be much darker than the top of the bench that she's sitting on. And now I'm going to start trying to get a little bit more of a contrast, because it was all very safe and I was trying to work out what things were. I was using very much light and mid-tones, and now it's time to start actually, defining what the different areas are. So obviously in this corner here, it would be darker and deeper in colour than this area down here where some light is actually getting in there. And the same with the side of the bench there, the inside of it. And then this side here would also be darker than the top of the bench because it's further away from the light source. And then when this is dry, I need to bring in an even darker brown or something to start to put the details in there. So let me have a look what you're seeing and whether, yeah, that's reading a bit better, isn't it, as a bench rather than a box. So again, along here, this is going to be in shadow, so I'm going to use a bit more of the burnt ochre to start strengthening up some of the colour. But in this case, I'm going to need to bring in those two other colours that I used, the cobalt green and the phthalo green. So the areas where there's no light hitting it, you can allow your colours to be less transparent. And the top areas where the light is hitting it, it needs to be a little bit more transparent to, you know, tell that story about what's happening. And all of this side of the boxes would be darker in colour, and the top and that side would be lighter because there's more light hitting that area. Still keeping in mind that you need a bit of variation. You don't want it all to be solid. So you still need to have lighter and darker areas, but overall the tone of it needs to be darker here than it does on those areas. So this is how you start to tell a bit more of a story about what's happening without using white necessarily as your highlight, but you use the same colours but in different intensity to start telling that story. And then of course shadows will be a different colour again, but just to sort of start telling the story of, you know, that part is under the shade of that, whereas the light is hitting that, and so on and so on. Now, as to what she is sitting on at her feet, I haven't quite decided, do I want it to be that she's sitting on grass or a path? All these decisions to make that I don't think about before I sit down. I think I might do it more as a path, and I'm going to use a warm grey. So to start with, I'm going to use warm grey 2, which is 271, and warm grey 3, which is 272. I think that one needs a little bit of a sharpen. Okay, so back to that brush that I have been using most regularly, and I'm just going to put a bit of colour down here to just get started at grounding these items. So I'll start with the warm grey 2. And I haven't really decided where I want the horizon to be either. I think it probably needs to be maybe about there. We'll work on that for starters. I can change it later. So this is a warm grey 2 to start with. And then I'm going to do the warm grey 3 while it's still wet, just in the areas where it needs to be a little bit darker. Yeah, this paper is not great when I use lots of water. So roughly keep the horizon So just working with the warm grey 2 and 3 to get started, and then I'll bring some other colours in once that's been established and at least they're not floating anymore. I do find it a bit off-putting when, pardon me, the artist doesn't put the horizon in and the figures look like they're just floating. Okay, so while that is while that is wet now, I've got warm grey 5, which is 274. Pardon me, this frog in the throat or gravelly voice is most annoying. So I like to run a little bit of the darker colour along the edge of the box and then feather it out, thinking about you know, horizontal sort of direction so that it's in line with the horizon. And again, thinking about would she be casting a shadow? If the light is coming in that direction, would she be casting a shadow? And yes, she probably would. And again, you know, underneath these legs of the bench, it needs to be darker to ground those items so that they don't look like they're floating. And this corner of the box would be creating quite a shadow too. So just trying to get a steady hand there to get into that little corner, and then let it bleed out a little bit. So again, I'll just keep checking how it's looking to you guys in the camera. I think it's actually reading a bit lighter, a bit paler for you than what it is in real life for me, and it's probably the light coming in the window there. Now, to break up all of that grey, I'm actually going to add a little bit of dark sepia to it. Again, for the more shadowed areas. So dark sepia is 175. And now to tell the story, I'm going to use some of the colours that are in the boxes as well, and perhaps a little bit of the deep blue. So this is the brown ochre. And I'm just going to wet the paper and try and get that to bleed sort of in a bit of a abstract, loose way. I don't want to control that too much. And then here, where it's a bit more shadowed, I'm going to put in a little bit of the blue as well. And watercolour does tend to dry a little bit lighter than when you first put it on. So keep that in mind, that you can build up a little bit of colour if you need to. Okay, now I need to bring a bit of sky down to make sense of what's doing here. So going back to the phthalo blue. So I don't really want a hard horizon line, I just want to try to sort of make sense of where the horizon is, but not make it really obvious. Okay. That's looking okay, I think. So now we'll move to the top part while we're waiting for the bottom to dry a little bit again. So just move that down a little bit, and hopefully we are all good. So I'd like to bring a little bit of colour in up here because it is very pale still. So I was thinking of bringing in a new colour. I actually might make something yellow, but not a real bright yellow. So I'm going to use dark Naples ochre, which is 184, and light yellow ochre, which is 183. And this little shirt here, I'm going to make this shirt yellow. So again, thinking about where it needs to have a bit of a shadow. Oh, excuse me. So we'll put the yellow there. And then I was thinking, oh, what will we do this one here? I'm thinking maybe in this sort of colour. So the cobalt green. Let's start with that and then we can work out what to do after that. I just don't want to flick this over the sky. Okay, so I'm just trying to get a sense of what would be catching the light, what would be a little bit darker on the fabric. And that's a good start, I think, so we'll leave that now. And just a little tiny bit in there is required. And I'll work out if I'm going to do some sort of ribbon or braided edge on there. And I think the shirt, I feel like I need more pink in here, so I might do the shirt in the pink, which is middle purple pink. Let's bring a bit more of that in here. Trying to be careful not to flick any bits into the sky. So I've got this very loose and this is tightly controlled, so I may have to bring in a bit of splatter somewhere else just to balance things up. So I might do that down the bottom at the end. Just try to get a bit of a feel for that going on. And now I'm going to use the dark Naples ochre in her hair a little bit as well. So again, that helps to tie in that shirt up there with what's going on in the bottom of the page. And maybe a fraction of that in these little horns that the dog has got. I don't know why he's got horns. I haven't actually looked into what the story of this book is supposed to be. Alright, so we might, we need to do the socks, I think. I could leave something white up there. Do I leave the socks white or the, whatever that is, white? I'll leave the socks white, I think. So what I will do is I've just got a little bit of the, this is warm grey 3. I'm just going to do a little bit of that on the ribbed part of the top of the sock and the toe. Maybe down there, just so that it gives it some shape. And I might do the same with this thing here and leave it predominantly white. And I've just got to cover over that bit there where I had the sky go over it. But that's how I could get away with that. So with the, do it with the dark sepia, I think. I'm just going to get it quite wet. And then trying not to flick it onto her or the bench, I'm just going to put a bit of, sorry, you probably can't see that. I'm just going to flick a little bit of it around down here. And where the paper is still damp, that will blend a little bit. It's probably all I want down there at this stage. So I think I might need to let some things dry again. I'll take another break. So at this point of the video I need to do a voiceover because there was an awful lot of background noise going on, and then my husband decided to stop and have a conversation with our next door neighbour right outside the window where I was working. So I'll do my best to do a voiceover here and explain what's happening. So I have sped up the footage in this section because all I'm doing is adding coloured pencil over the top of the watercolour base. And I'm going to talk through some thoughts here as I watch it back. Some thoughts come to me, and I'm going to do my best to try and explain my thought process as I'm watching this. When I came back to the page after having a little break, I'd allowed the paper to dry and taken a short break and came back to have a look at it and thought that the colours were still, at this point, a little bit too light. And because the paper was so cockled and buckled, I didn't think that it could cope with too much more water being added to it. So I got the Faber Castell Polychromos out and used the corresponding pencil for the Albrecht Durer pencil. So the colours are very much the same. I think they've got the same names, but I can't remember all the numbers now at this stage. So I got the corresponding Polychromos pencil out and started to add colour, and you're going to hear Hamish in the background in a moment. He's got a Chewy toy out. So my thought process as I was colouring was that I wanted to introduce some details and some definition because that contrast was really lacking. And instead of adding it with the Albrecht Durers and adding that extra amount of water onto the page, I thought that I could achieve it better by using the coloured pencil. The coloured pencil, however, is much more opaque, and if I'd kept a very light touch, it probably would have had a much greater result than what I ended up doing, because the temptation with coloured pencil for me is to keep getting darker and darker and building up layers, and that's really not what I had intended for this page when I started out. When I looked at the page, when I chose the page, the subject is very whimsical, and the drawing style of this artist is really very light. So there isn't heavy dark line work, it's quite light. It's got a very whimsical touch about it. And it does have a reasonable amount of details, but it's not overdone. And so the subject of obviously washing, blowing in the breeze on the washing line, the fabric doesn't appear to be heavy fabric. It's nice and light, it's blowing in the breeze. So I thought watercolour would be great for portraying that with the translucency of watercolour. I thought that would be perfect, but by coming back and adding pencil on here, I've lost that feeling and made it look heavier. So if I had perhaps not used so much pencil, it might not look so bad. I might have to go back with an eraser now and see if I can lighten that up, and I might try and record some new footage of me trying to rescue this page and show you what I would do in this case when I'm unhappy with something. So the box that the wicker basket is sitting on at this point doesn't look too bad. I haven't really overdone things too much there, but I do go on to add more to it. And when it comes to the bench that she's sitting on here, I get far too heavy with the pencil, and that is just something that I do. My personality is that when I get those pencils in my hand, I just start layering and layering and darker, and I get a really saturated result with them. And in itself, that is not a problem, but it is when I'm trying to portray an image that I feel is very light and airy and fresh. So this is all very much personal opinion, and you could look at what I do here and say it's okay, it turned out okay and it looks okay, but it's not meeting the idea that I had in my head when I first started colouring the page. So coloured pencils obviously by nature are much more opaque than watercolour pencils. Watercolour and watercolour pencils give you that nice translucent feeling where you can actually see the white of the paper coming through, and that's what gives it its vibrancy for me. It gives it a pure, clean colour. The coloured pencils, though, are much more opaque and heavy, and in this instance, for this picture, I feel that I choose colours that are too dark, too heavy, and a bit overwhelming for the subject. I'm not criticising myself here, although it hasn't met the initial idea that I set out to do. I'm not being highly critical with myself and saying that it's bad, but it's not meeting what I set out to do, and I'm just trying to explain to you my thought process about why that is. So that if you come to do something similar yourself and you look back at your picture and you're not happy about it, it might help you to start thinking about why your results haven't met your expectation, and work out what went wrong without being critical in the sense that you're having a go at yourself, but just having a look at it and say, well, what can I learn from this and what can I do differently next time? So I'm hoping by sharing my thought process and talking it through with you that might help you at some point in your colouring. Now, colouring to me is a hobby, and it's a light-hearted hobby. And when I talk about art and art techniques and so on, it's really to help you get a concept of how things work, and so you can create effects and things to achieve the look that you want as well. But I'm not elevating a colouring book or this particular colouring book page to the status of art. It's just that I'm referring to those art techniques to help you see how that transfers into colouring. I hope that makes sense, but I'm trying to get things into perspective where I don't necessarily think about my colouring books as an art form. I know other people elevate their colouring and their colouring books to an art form, but personally I don't. This is all very much a relaxing hobby for me. So this is where I'm starting to get to the point where I'm overdoing things already, and I can see it now, but I couldn't see it at the time when I was doing it. And I think that the colour is much too bold. So the red is much too bold. But when I started doing it, I also thought that I was going to add lots more colour to the girl as well, so that she would become equally as intense in colour. But I didn't actually do that, I don't think. And looking at it now, I can see that I'm starting to lose all of that initial watercolour lightness, and it's starting to become like any other sort of colouring page for me. And that's not what I was looking for here. I was looking for a much more fresh, light and whimsical feeling. And as I'm watching the coloured pencil going down, it's starting to feel very heavy and static. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like this, it's losing the movement of the wind in the clothes, and it's just looking much more heavy and static. She looks like she's really relaxed and calm there. She's lifting her face to the sun, and you get the sense that she's enjoying, you know, sitting there in the breeze with the sunshine on her face. And that to me has an implication of lightness. And what I do here with all the pencils is I make it really very heavy and a very different type of illustration to what I was hoping to create. I often talk about matching your colouring style to the style of the illustration, and this is probably quite a good example of where I don't necessarily hit the mark when it comes to my ideas of what type of illustration it is. So in colouring books, quite often I choose images that I describe to you as being reminiscent to me of children's picture book or storybook illustrations. And to me, I interpret that as meaning vibrant, saturated, bold, deep colours. That's the association that I make in my mind when I think, yep, children's picture book, that's the type of illustrations that you see, that's how I'm going to colour this. But of course, children's picture books have many different styles, so that's not entirely accurate, but that's the thinking that I have in my head when I look at it. So when I looked at this particular book, these drawings are really quite delicate, and if you see the original watercolour paintings of them, they don't necessarily say to me children's picture book or storybook. They say to me that they could actually be standalone watercolour paintings as a piece of art in themselves. But of course they could be used in a children's storybook as well. It's just a different type of illustration style. So there are many different types of styles and many ways that you can colour it. And this is just an explanation of how I make that distinction in my own mind when I decide how to colour something. So what I'm doing at this particular point is I was starting to think about where the light source might be coming from on her face. And so I was thinking that the light was probably coming from that top left-hand corner, because that's the way she is actually looking. It's like she's got her face to the sun. And I can't remember what this page is called right off the top of my head now, but basically she's just sitting there. The story that it suggests to me is that it might be a lovely spring day, and she's got the laundry out, the washing is hanging on the line, there's a gentle breeze, and she's got her face to the sun enjoying a little bit of warmth. And so that's the story that it suggests to me. And then my mind goes to, how do I see that scene then? How do I want to portray that scene? And to my thinking, it's very nostalgic. The way that the artist has drawn this is, it's kind of naive and nostalgic to me. So that translates to, I wanted fresh, bright but gentle colours, not necessarily saturated heavy colours. You might think that this is going way too in-depth for a colouring book page, and maybe it is, but I'm just sharing some thoughts with you because you may be at the point where you're looking at taking your pages a little bit more seriously and looking at how you can actually how you can actually put a bit more thought into what you're doing, I guess. There are other pages that I don't put this much thought into. Like I really just colour, and that's the end of it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But the very fact that I'm giving you a bit of a demonstration and showing you how I might colour things like this kind of requires a little bit of explanation of where I'm coming from. So there are some details here where the use of coloured pencil is perfectly adequate, perfectly suitable. In fact, drawing that washing line in the rope with a brush with a water-based medium requires a level of skill, a gentle touch. And if that feels like it's a bit beyond you, then, it's perfectly okay to use pencil to put that little bit of detail in there. And I keep the hair and the face quite light. I don't overdo that either. So that in itself isn't such a bad thing. But it's this heavy, bold red that's bothering me, I think. And the depth of colour there on that green box is starting to get very saturated as well. Now they are heavy, solid objects, so you could get away with doing that, but I just think the combination of that against how light I wanted to keep the fabrics and the sense of movement with the fabric blowing in the wind doesn't work very well together. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect for me that's jarring, and it's not really sitting very well. So in hindsight, watching this back, I can see where I started to go wrong. And my natural tendency for colouring is to colour very deep, saturated colour. It's just what I like to do. It's my natural tendency to do that. And I'd completely forgotten about using the watercolour pencils in the way that they're meant to be used. And that is matching your colouring style to the actual properties of the medium that you're using. So by that I mean watercolour, or anything water-based really, is more translucent, and it allows the white of the paper to come through, and it creates a much cleaner, brighter look about the colours, whereas the coloured pencils being opaque gives that saturated, heavy look to the colours. So I had sort of lost my way, I think, when I introduced the coloured pencil. I really should have just been using a much lighter touch and not layering so much, and not trying to get so deep with the colour. So I don't think that all the colour choices were necessarily wrong. It's just that I have applied them much too heavily and too solidly. I've not allowed the white of the paper to shine through. I can also see that I was starting to fiddle far too much. I should have stopped a while ago, and that really is a great skill to learn when to stop. So my next move will be that I am going to think about how I can best remove some of that colour. An eraser will take some of it off, but I find with heavily pigmented pencils like the Polychromos, they almost stain the paper. So they fill the tooth and they stain the paper because the pigment is so strong. But that might actually be able to be used to my advantage when it comes to that bench. It might help me achieve the kind of faded, paint look that I was hoping for. So I will do that on camera as well. I think it will be useful for you to see whether that in fact works and whether it's something that you might be able to use in your own colouring if you do the same things as I do and get too heavy and use too much pencil at some stage. Here, as I'm trying to do something to describe the ground that she's on, I'm using the pencil on its side. So I'm not using the tip of the pencil, I'm using it on its side, and that creates a little bit of texture. The pencil actually skips over the surface of the paper, so the tooth is like, you know, little valleys and highs and lows, and so the pencil's just sitting on the top on those highest points. It's not actually going down and burnishing in those lower points, so it creates a nice texture, and I do manage to keep that reasonably light. I also don't want to do too much of a harsh horizon line there, so I'm just doing it so that the two colours meet, but there's not a really obvious hard line there. It's more of a gradual change from the ground to the background sky. I'm also trying to stay mindful of the lines that the artist has drawn for us that describes the texture of the wood or the way that the lines in the wicker basket are going and so on. So I'm trying to keep my strokes and my colouring in the same direction as those details, just so that it helps to describe what's going on a little bit better. But I really am fiddling way too much at this point, so it is sometimes useful to record yourself and then look back at what you're doing, and you can pinpoint those times that you should have stopped. So I will pick the book up so that you can see some of those details more closely, and it's quite clear that I've gone very heavy over that watercolour pencil and just about obliterated it, and that wasn't really what I wanted to achieve. So let's see if I can actually recover that a little bit. So I'm going to have a go and see if I can remedy lightening off this area that is really bothering me. I feel like I've overdone. And I'm going to use a battery operated eraser that I bought from Temu or AliExpress, one of those sort of cheaper places. I've had several that have been Derwent and they're good. I like them, and I've got lots of these refills for the eraser from Derwent. When I bought this particular cheap one, I got some of these blue coloured replacement erasers with them, but I like the Derwent ones, but I kept dropping them or knocking them off the table and breaking them, and once the back was broken off of them, you know, it was hard to fix them and have them keep working. So you can use whatever eraser suits you the best. I like these ones in particular because you can get into tight places and actually make lifted colour results with those tighter, smaller sort of erasers. You can buy manual ones that are this sort of shape as well, you know, that go into holders and so on. Loads of different types of erasers, so have a look around and see what suits you best, but that's what I'm actually going to use here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase back some of this red that is far too bold for my liking, and I'm just going to get my fan brush to brush all the bits away. So the goal is really just to lighten off some of these areas that I've gone much too dark in. And can you see what I'm talking about here? If I wanted to make a special highlighted area or effect, you can use your eraser to do that. You see how it's creating effect there. So they're really handy for that. Also, if you're erasing a big area, your hand can get a bit fatigued, so these battery operated ones can be handy. for doing that. So you can see that is actually taking quite a bit back off of that red, and I think I'm going to feel a lot better about things when there's not so much red on here. I'm doing it in the direction again of the grain, what the grain of the wood would be, so where the artist has, you know, described it for us. I'm going to do a little bit along this edge because I liked it better when that wasn't quite so dark as well. I actually don't mind leaving this bit a bit darker because that reads okay, I think, for being in the shadow of that top part of the bench. And I'm really just holding that very lightly to the surface, and the eraser is doing the work for me. The battery operated eraser is doing the work for me. Now when the battery is new, when the eraser is new, it does skip away from you quite easily, so you can end up erasing areas that you don't really want to erase, so just keep that in mind. You may, if you buy one, want to practice with it a little bit before you go near something that has taken you a long time to colour, and then you inadvertently erase it and, you know, have a result that you're not necessarily happy with. And when sometimes the colour can build up on the edge of the eraser, just clean it off on a piece of paper or you know, an old rag or something, piece of fabric, but you just like rub it against there and it will take that colour off and clean it for you. And you can also shape the eraser the same way by just sort of keep using it against a piece of paper, and you can round off or sharpen to a point your eraser if that's going to help you get the effect that you need better. So you may remember that I was talking about wanting it to look like it was faded wood that had worn away, and this is starting to look a little bit more like I was thinking about when I was talking about that. So what I think happened was I felt like the watercolour pencil layer was too light and it was all too much the same, and I needed to vary the contrast. But what I did was actually darken everything to the same intensity and therefore created the same problem but with darker colours. So I'm just going to take, let's bring that down, just a little bit of colour off of here as well. I want a bit of a shadow left there, I think. And of course you don't have to press the button either, you can use the eraser manually like that as well. So, you know, just be careful you don't disturb the surface of the paper too greatly. And I'm going to come back down here to this bit that I feel like I just did too much, basically. What I was trying to say in the voiceover was that although I wasn't 100% happy with it, that doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. It's just that it wasn't hitting that spot where it met my expectations of how I wanted it to look. just need to lighten a few areas back off. Take it back to that sort of watercolour base layer. See, I feel that's looking better again now. It's not dominating everything so much, because really, you know, the girl and her little friends here are far more interesting and important to whatever's going on than a wooden box that they're sitting on. So I feel like I'm getting a bit more of a better balance there already. I don't think I overdid things too much on her clothes. So I'll just lift a little bit of that pencil back off of there. But I kept her hair and her face quite light, and I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, I'm starting to feel much. I just want to lighten off in the centre there so that it gives you an idea of the shape of the basket a little bit better. So I know sometimes I do repeat myself a lot. Sometimes when you're sitting here talking to yourself, you go into this little bit of a trance, I guess, when you're working, and you talk. Well, I do. I talk out loud. I'm thinking out loud. I'm thinking as I'm talking, and so sometimes I repeat myself, and I don't even realise I've done it until I go back and listen to the footage when I'm editing. So I apologise for that. Just take some of that out of there. And it may not look that different to you, but it does to me, and I'm feeling a lot better about the intensity of that red colour for sure. And I'm just wondering if this is reading okay as a shelf. So again, what I might do with this is just sit with it for a little while. So this is starting to look much more like weathered wood, like I was hoping it would. At least to me it is anyway. And that's not looking quite so solid. Maybe take a little bit of colour out of there, but that's not looking nowhere near as solid as it was. I might just... So again, it's just trying to capture that right amount of contrast between the items so that you're describing things and getting the information out there without having to actually draw in every single detail. And I'm quite happy to leave that background as an abstract background. And I've had the book sitting overnight with some heavy weight on it, and you can see it's still quite buckled and wrinkled. If I hold it up this way, you can see like it's really out of shape. So this book does not like a lot of water, at least this version. I was having a look to see if I could see where it was printed. It's printed in the United States. Published in the United States by Ulysses Press, and is printed in United States. So it's heavier than Amazon paper, but it's still not much better than copy paper. And the name of the painting is actually on the back of each page. And so this one is called The Scent of the Sun. And it was created in 2016. You can see that I've got quite a bit of bleed through there. So I'm feeling better about that myself. I don't know what you think. You can let me know in the comments if you think it was better or worse with the pencil on. But I'm feeling better about that. I may just sit with it and look at it for a while to determine whether I need to take any more off of here. But I'm pretty much finished with it now. So if you've watched this whole video, it has been a rather long one. I have felt like I've messed around a little bit with this one. The paper certainly has challenged me, so I don't think I will be using so much water on it again. I may try to iron this. I'll have a think about that. If I iron it, I've got a feeling that it's just actually going to put more wrinkles into it, but we'll see. I may get around to trying it, I may not. So there you go. That is the Forest Girls colouring book by Aeppol, or Aeppol. And that is The Scent of the Sun. So thanks for joining me. If you have this book and you've used water in it, let me know how you found it as well, or whether you found a particular pencil or medium that has worked really well for you in this book. I'd appreciate hearing your experience. So until the next time, take care everyone, and I will see you soon. Bye now. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on the next one.